Aloha, my name is Jay. I'm your local real estate agent here on the Big Island, the biggest and the best island out of all the Hawaii Islands. If you're looking to buy a property and you're working with a realtor, whether it be me or any other real estate agent, one of the first documents you will need to sign in this home buying process is the buyer representation agreement. So let's go over to my computer screen and I'll show you exactly what this document looks like and how it gets filled out.
Okay, so right here we have the buyer representation contract. If you've never signed one of these before and never seen one, I could totally understand that this contract might look a little daunting, which is why in this video I'm going to go over every single section of this contract and explain everything to you so that whenever you have to sign one of these things, you're going to be informed and more comfortable having to sign it. One thing I want to point out is that this contract is only for Hawaii. Different states and different brokerages are going to have different forms. They're all going to essentially have the same information, but they're going to be formatted differently. So they're not going to look the same as this. Just throwing that out there so if you get a form from in a different state, you're not going to be confused. And another thing that I wanted to mention is that realtors are obligated to use the most recent form of the buyer representation contract. The Association of Realtors, every now and again, they revise these forms, they add or remove things. This is the most recent revision, 225 for Hawaii, so that's what we're using. Anyway, let's begin with the contract. This first little section is basically stating who this contract is between, the brokerage firm and the buyer's name. So I am in eXp Realty, so that's what I put in there. And then the buyer's name or the client's name would go here. If it's a married couple, we could put both of their names in here. Section number 1 is like a glossary. It explains different terms. It explains what an agency is, what a seller's agent is, buyer's agent, and a dual agent. So if you want to be more familiar with real estate lingo, just read through these definitions. Next up, we have section number 2. And this is the appointment of an exclusive agent. What this means is that by signing this contract, you are agreeing to work with only me as your realtor. You're not going to hire multiple realtors. You're only going to be using me for showings, for appointments, and for submitting offers. So for example, if you come to me and you tell me that you want to work with me, and I ask you if you already have one of these signed with another agent, and you say yes, I will ask you to cancel that contract with the other agent first before I can work with you. And over here, we have the types of properties that I am able to show you. If I mark only one of these, that means I can only show you residential properties, single family homes. I don't really like to do that because sometimes people want to look at other things. So right here, the list is residential, condo, co-op, land, and commercial or industrial buildings. All of these are encompassed if I simply put an X over here, any real estate. This simply means that I can show you any of these categories. After that, we have location of property. I can either select all Hawaiian islands. I only work on the Big Island or Hawaii Island, so I do not X this. I put an X on other and I type in Hawaii Island. Section number 3 is pretty important. This is listing the duration of the contract. So this would be the start date and this would be the end date. So the start date would typically be the date when you go on the first house showing. And then it ends at whatever date the realtor puts here. I generally do 6 months because most clients, they end up looking at multiple properties. There's some agents that do 24 hours, 3 days, 7 days. But then when those 7 days are up, and you want to look at another property, then you have to re-sign another one of these contracts. And even though 6 months sounds like a very long time, there's a clause in here that says you can cancel the very next day after signing this contract. Not all realtors are going to put this in here, but whatever contract I draft up, I always write that you can cancel the next day after signing, whatever date that is. That's why I'm comfortable with just putting 6 months later in here. And this number 1 right over here, this simply states that you can't cancel the contract for at least 1 day. So you can't sign this and then immediately cancel it. You have to wait for 1 day. Section number 4 explains dual agency in more detail. Basically what this means is if we are going to look at a house and you decide to purchase it, and the listing agent on the other side is from the same brokerage firm as me, that is called a dual agency. And we have to disclose that, and both the seller and the buyer have to sign a separate disclosure form that they understand and they consent to a dual agency. Even though it's rare, dual agencies could become a conflict of interest. It rarely happens, but it does, therefore the disclosure and the signatures. Section number 5 is the buyer's brokerage firm obligations. And this, in summary, is basically just saying that we will do all we can in the best interests of the buyer. The seller's agent, or the listing agent, is mainly concerned with the interests of the homeowner, the person selling the house, whereas the buyer's agent is looking out for the buyer's interests. So this section outlines what the buyer's agent will do for their client. And next section, section number 6, is the buyer's obligation. So the main point here is that the buyer is agreeing to cooperate with the brokerage firm that they're hiring. So that means answering messages in a reasonable and timely fashion, providing relevant documents when asked for, keeping appointments. So if you promise to show up somewhere, you actually show up, or at least let us know if you're not coming, attending inspections, and etc. And on the bottom of the page, we have our first signature slot. Well, it's not really signatures, it's initials, but if I were to send you this form, you would put your initials here and you would put the date here. And if you look on the other side, we have the broker's initials and dates. The broker is the guy in charge. So every single time we get one of these buyer representation contracts signed, the broker has to sign off on it as well, making sure that all the information on there is correct and nothing is wrong with the contract. So it's an extra layer of security. Moving on, we go to page 2. Section number 7 is about non-discrimination. And in summary, is just saying that the buyer's brokerage firm complies with all federal and state fair housing and anti-discrimination laws, which include all the things that they list right over here. Megan's Law is about registered sex offenders. The realtors, they don't have access to such information. But if the buyer was interested to get this information, they're agreeing that they would reach out to the law enforcement officials to get this info. The realtor won't be providing that. And we have section number 10. This one is pretty important as well. The first thing I want to point out is this big bold text right here that says, broker commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. Everything in real estate is pretty much negotiable. In fact, one of my teammates was telling me that when he was submitting a purchase offer for a client on a house, the client asked him to also include the truck that is standing in the garage. So they submitted the purchase offer, agreeing to pay the full asking price if the homeowner was willing to leave that truck. Of course, the seller is not obligated to accept that, but in that case, he did. He actually left the truck behind. But anyway, I'm going a little off track. Let's get back to section number 10, which is compensation. In section A right here, it's basically telling you the amount of commission that the agent will get if a transaction closes. So for us on our team, the default is 3% of sales price plus GET, which is general excise tax here in Hawaii. So when we start working together and later we submit a purchase offer, I would put this in as the terms for the commissions. I would get 3% of the sales price, which is paid by the seller. And one question I often get is, what if the seller refuses to pay that commission? Because everything is negotiable, right? We have other special terms right over here that I will talk about in a little bit. I'll get back to that. So this is the normal, the default for our team and just for most of Hawaii and most states. Section number I and I2. This one, the wording is really confusing, so I'll just explain it in my own words. This is basically a protection clause for the real estate agent. Let's say that I have a client that signs one of these contracts with me, and then we go on to look at 15 different houses with this client. And on house number 15, the seller happens to be a high school friend of my client. They reconnect and they hit it off, and behind my back, he starts talking to his buddy and he says, hey, why don't we fire my buyer's agent and you can fire your listing agent and we can make this sale just between us. I know you would never do that, but there are some people that do that, so that's why we have this protection clause. So what this means is that for 90 days after the expiration of this agreement, if my client decides to buy a house, one of the houses that we looked at together, without me, I am due a commission. It's pretty rare that situations like this arise, but because of unpretty situations that happened in the past, now we have this clause in here as well. Typically, the numbers that realtors will put in here are either 90 or 180 days. Moving on, we have section B, which is initial consultation and research fee. My team does not do this. We don't charge anything. The only commission that we take and payment is at the time of the closing of a transaction. But some agents and some brokerages, they do charge a fee for that initial consultation and the research fee. So they would put a number in here. In my case, I would simply put NA here, and they would put an X on will instead of will not. Section C simply states that all the commissions that we will receive will not exceed the amount or rate that we agreed on in this agreement. And the items in section 11 I already covered earlier, but just to reiterate, it's basically saying that the buyer guarantees or promises that they do not have any buyer brokerage agreements with other agents or with other firms. And finally, section number 12, which is other special terms. This one is pretty important as well because realtors can pretty much put anything they want in here. Although their brokerage firm, because the broker has to sign this, they will check this, so they can't do anything too wild, but you definitely want to read it. So in my case, I have 3 points, 1, 2, 3. And for me and most of my team, this is the default. Any client that works with us pretty much is going to get the same other special terms. So point number 1 states that buyer gives the brokerage firm approval to negotiate the compensation listed in 10A within the purchase contract. This means that if we submit a purchase offer and the seller submits a counter offer to our offer, then you're allowing our brokerage firm and me as your representative to negotiate on your behalf. Number 2, remember how I was talking about the scenario where the seller doesn't want to pay my commission? This is what this is here for. It says that in the event the seller is not offering buyer's broker compensation, buyer and buyer's brokerage firm can renegotiate the fee listed in 10A prior to a fully executed offer. This means that if the seller is refusing to pay the buyer agent's commission, then we can renegotiate the percentage to make it lower, or we can adjust the purchase price offer. And number 3 says, if the total agreed upon fee cannot be negotiated with the seller, the buyer and broker may negotiate in writing a lesser amount that is acceptable to both parties prior to having a fully executed offer. And I know this sounds very loaded, but just to clarify, this very rarely happens, that the seller refuses to pay the buyer's agent commission. And when it does happen, everything has to be in writing, so nothing will happen without your understanding and without your consent. Sorry for the long-winded explanation, but long story short, all this is saying is that we're going to try to renegotiate to get my commission, and if we can't do that, then essentially I'm going to have to take a pay cut. If the pay cut is not enough, then we're going to have to sit down and talk about it and decide what we're going to do. But anyway, let's move on. We have some more initials and dates right here. And page 3 is the easiest one. So right here we have the buyer's name. We would put your name in here, the date, you would sign, and the buyer's address, phone, and email is nice to have, but this part is optional. And of course, if it's a married couple, this would be the spouse's information right over here. Right here, we have buyer brokerage's firm, eXp Realty once again. This is the brokerage license number. They would date it, they would sign it right here too. This is the brokerage's firm address, their phone number, and the last section is my information, the buyer's agent. So here's my name, my phone number, my license number, my email, and since we don't charge any other fees besides the commission, This section is NA, nothing was charged to you in the form of any payment, and there's no signatures needed. That is it. Thank you so much for sticking it out with me, and if you stayed all the way to the end of this contract, I have a couple of jokes for you that I will deliver outside.
Which country's capital has the fastest growing population? It's Ireland. Every day, it's Dublin. And did you know that if your left arm gets cut off, your right arm will be left?